I'm just watching this video showing that bomb exploding outside a house in Limerick City, which is frightening.
Yeah, I mean,
to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it's genuinely when you see it, and it's on Sunday World site, and we'll put it up on our social media channels. You can see the threat to life there. It is, quite dramatic. It's a black and white video, obviously from the local area, but this is part of an ongoing series of incidents that are happening on a weekly basis in the Hyde Road area of Limerick in Ballinacurra Weston. Obviously, that area became associated with the Dundons. The Dundon brothers are obviously from the Hyde Road itself. So in the aftermath of their jailing, we've just seen this constant stream of violence, and it's believed that this latest bomb attack was an attempt to intimidate associates of April Collins, who continues to live on the area.
So, I mean, we're saying since they've been jailed, it's continuous. Is it, or is it sporadic rather than, when you get bursts of violence like this and intimidation?
Yeah, I mean, look, the seriousness of it is sporadic. I mean, there's been shots fired at the Collins family home. Yeah. There's been, very serious attacks. But there's also like an ongoing stream of very, very minor ones as well. I mean, even recently, just a couple of weeks ago, there was another attack on a property. And there have been responses as well. So it's a complicated situation.
Touch the microphone there, sorry.
Yeah.
I started talking to while I was bent down. Yeah. I was going to say, there's probably a lot of listeners out there who don't remember the whole Limerick story and who the Collinses are. So it's probably worthwhile sort of detailing how the Collins, members of the Collins family, were part and parcel of the Dundon gang until it all started to fall apart. And females in the Collins family, in particular, April Collins, her mother, Alice Collins, and her sister, all gave evidence at trials that resulted in basically the jailing of those two brothers, John and Wayne Dundon.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back...
Remind us what happened.
Well, if you look back, actually, there's a great photo. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was in the 2000s where there was some sort of negotiated peace deal between the Dundon McCarthy faction and the Keane Collopy. And they had representatives from both sides shaking hands for the camera. I think there was clergy involved and some local.
When was that?
Look, it was in the 2000s at some stage. It was meant to it was meant to settle the feud. There was the father of the Collopy brothers was there, but one of the people representing the Dundon McCarthys was Jimmy Collins Senior. He was there shaking hands, so he was very much, he was a sort of core part of that operation. Very close with the Dundons.
Jimmy Collins would have sort of been an enforcer within the Dundon operation, or a heavy, or... Yeah,
and a kind of a senior figure. He would have been a generation older than...
And he had two sons, I think, involved, did he?
No, he had one son involved, Garrett Collins, who ultimately suffered a tragedy not associated with the feud. Garrett Collins had served a period of time for firearms offences. But Jimmy Collins Senior was regarded as being, a person of note within that organisation. And one of the reasons why he was so trusted by the Dundons is that his daughter, April, was in a long-term relationship with Ger Dundon since she'd been in her mid-teens. So the families were tied together in that way. But what happened was Ger Dundon, who is currently in jail in the UK for a plot involving Cornelius Price, his relationship ended with April Collins. April Collins had, before she started going out with Ger Dundon, she dated a guy called Thomas O'Neill.
Oh, before?
Yes, before.
Right. So the flame's still... flickering.
Yes, and then she'd gotten together with Ger Dundon, and they'd been together for a number of years. And Ger Dundon, he'd been in and out of prison all his adult life. During one of those stints in prison, Thomas O'Neill had been released. He had served a lengthy sentence for his role in a gang rape in the Cratloe Woods, a very notorious crime that we've spoken about before. And when he got out of prison, April Collins and him struck eyes across Hyde Road or whatever it occurred, and they started up their relationship. Ultimately, after she ended her relationship with Ger.
And Ger Dundon was the only one of the 4 active sort of criminal brothers. There was Desi, John, Wayne and himself. He's the only one that hasn't got a life sentence now. He's serving a lengthy sentence. From memory, he got 15 years in the UK.
Yeah.
Which he won't serve all of, obviously. But his other 3 brothers are all ultimately serving life in prison. He was in prison, I think, when she decided she was breaking up.
Yeah, she broke up with him in prison. He didn't take it well, by all accounts, and went mental. And in the meantime...
it sounds so like... Brian Rattigan.
Kind of like that.
He was serving life. That's why I wanted to point out that Ger Dundon in this case was actually going to finish a sentence and get back out.
Yeah,
but she was very young anyway.
She was young.
She was only 15 or 16 when she got together with him.
She was, and they had a number of children very quickly. But the Dundon brothers were all in and out. I mean, Desi was serving life for his role in the murder of Kieran Keane Sr., but the other 2 brothers ultimately got out as well. When they got out, there was a dispute, obviously, with April Collins. I mean, you don't get to break up with these guys. Like, this is what I've tried to actually explain to people. It doesn't matter if they break up with you, if you're a woman, like, you don't get to move on. Like, there's
no equal rights in that world.
There's no equal rights. It's not. So he didn't take it well, and Wayne and John started putting pressure on April Collins in various ways, including, visiting him in prison with the children, stuff along those lines. Ultimately, to cut a long story short, they pushed her too far, and she would eventually go state witness and speak about everything she had seen as Ger Dundon's girlfriend, because the Dundon McCarthy gang had carried out a number of murders. John Dundon in particular was ultimately convicted of ordering the murder of a rival, but ultimately Shane Gagan being killed in error. So she spoke about the movements of cars, what she heard, what she saw.
Threats made against her.
And ultimately threats made against her as well. And that all ultimately, it was such an unusual situation for 2 reasons. Like we've seen with Jonathan Dowdall and other kind of supergrasses. I mean, April Collins is probably the most successful
state witness
of that type, because she led her evidence led to these direct convictions. But the unusual part was, although she briefly got out of Hyde Road, which is really, people would know it if they're from Limerick, but ultimately it's quite a main road just outside Limerick city centre, a long road, but it's a thoroughfare that people will drive through. Ultimately, she returned to her home, and even though she was living only a few hundred metres away from some of the most feared criminal figures in the country, and their various associates, she returned to live in her house. So you have, on this kind of relatively long road, you have 2 opposing factions. Now, Ger Dundon is in prison in the UK. Wayne and John are serving life sentences, but they still have
their homes.
They still have their homes there. They still have their families there. And then they also have their criminal associates a few hundred metres away, literally. Is it within eyesight? Probably not too far off being within eyesight.
Smallest drive down the road, blink and you're down at the Collins sort of stronghold, which is
at the other end of the
Jimmy
street.
And his wife Alice's house.
Yeah.
And round the corner where April lived. Throughout her life under threat, she refused really to go into witness protection. Or else it was maybe never even offered to her because she wasn't suitable for it. They did move her to Clare, I think, for a period of time, but she couldn't. It was too far away. So she came back to the Hyde Road area with him, and
with Thomas O'Neill, is currently behind bars for drug dealing. So he's continued to be involved in criminality.
So isn't it interesting that he's behind bars when an attack is levelled, against that sort of area of the road where they live, because he would have been a feared criminal as well. And in a way, her relationship with him probably gave her and gives her ongoing protection.
Well, it could well do. I mean, I don't know if Thomas O'Neill is capable of any sort of organised planning of anything. I mean, he's a very chaotic...
No, but he's a violent guy
he
that
is.
people would be afraid of.
Yes.
And I'm sure some of the young lads, because a lot of these sort of, petrol bombs being thrown and shots fired into windows are carried out by very young kids.
Well,
basically.
Exactly.
And I'm sure a lot of them would be more concerned about Thomas O'Neill when he's out than the Dundon boys who are in and not getting out in the near future.
And then to really complicate things, there's a web of sort of feuds, some connected with familial relationships, that if you were to try and describe it, to say it's simply, a Dundon versus Collins thing, it's just way more complex.
Yeah.
But what you're seeing really is, and we're seeing this in various other parts of the city, in sort of, for example, in Ronanstown area, where there's another feuds going on,
in Dublin.
So, but in Limerick, there's this series of events happening. Now, that bomb is very shocking and you see an image, but there's things going on all the time. Some of them as simple as smashing windows or
shouting. Past,
yeah. But it's a constant wave and nobody has been killed, but that's just by pure luck. So, I mean, the guards are very much on top of it. We can see some of the people involved are going in and out of prison. They're getting caught. But the fact is, if shots are being fired at a house, even if it's, from somebody driving past in a car or something, it only needs for something to go slightly different for a child or somebody innocent to be killed. And that's the other important bit of it. There's members of the Collins family who are totally and utterly innocent of any involvement in criminality, who are living in that area. There's a family network there, many innocent people, and their lives are really in danger. So yeah, look, it's
So where's Jimmy Collins now? Is he out?
Jimmy Collins is out. He did ultimately serve a relatively lengthy sentence for, in relation to threats against a local businessman.
Isn't it amazing though, like despite that whole, culture of omerta and how if touting or giving evidence that you're supposed to be completely blacklisted by everybody, that the attacks within are just still happening within that small section of rivalry. So it isn't this big, huge, criminal no to give evidence. It was weird, actually, that whole...
Well, it was.
And I sat through the cases when April Collins gave her evidence. She was an extremely good witness, as was her mother. And they, were unintimidated and they were very articulate as well. But they were doing what was supposed to be the ultimate no within the criminal underworld, which was, touting or ratting or giving evidence.
But they weren't alone, of course, because Anthony Noddy McCarthy...
Because everybody seemed to do it in Limerick.
And Anthony Noddy McCarthy, who would have been a first cousin of the Dundons, also gave evidence. I mean, he's serving a life sentence and he didn't have anything to gain from giving that evidence, which was something that was noted by the judges. So what happened was Limerick really turned on the Dundon brothers. I mean, they had enough of them. And that omerta became a grey area because people really blamed them for a lot of their woes and didn't feel they deserved the support. Ironically, actually, today, and when that bomb comes out, you get this wild rumour. I'm sure you got 3 or 4 texts about Wayne Dundon has been found dead, which is totally untrue. He's, behind bars. There's nothing wrong with him.
It was all over the place. It was all over Limerick that he was supposed to have been found dead in his cell. And we did make inquiries, and that is not the case, although the rumour had been heard even within the prison systems.
Exactly. So it just...
Where did that come from?
Well, I don't know, but it just shows you that the Dundons are still, they're still figures that are their names are ringing out. And Limerick is obviously the level of violence and gangland violence has absolutely, collapsed in Limerick once they were put behind bars. I mean, it really is instructive. While you often hear people say, well, what's the point in take one guy out and another guys will replace it. But
well, I think probably, the level of violence may have decreased. The level of crime hasn't. In actual fact, it has, it has gone to levels we never saw it. It was so chaotic, organised crime during the years of the Dundons, whereas now it's a sophisticated, slick machine, which is probably way more business-like than ever before. And I'd say there's an awful lot more drugs being moved around, dealt, and money being laundered than ever before when they were out.
Oh, too. I'd imagine that is 100% true. It's much more sophisticated. However, the fact that the violence is has really isn't there, or the level of violence isn't there, it's not nothing, and so it is important that these people aren't allowed have this reign of terror. And they really did have a reign of terror on that street, with houses being burnt out and people intimidated. And like April Collins, I think she did the state some service, it has to be said.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I wonder actually, would she be interested in coming on?
Well,
we'll
drop her a mail.
Line. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Niall.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.